Guys, I know what you're gonna say, that anyone who looks like this, anyone who dresses up like this, and anyone who annoys the fuck out of their pet just to get a little bit more attention in an Instagram reel is not someone that you should take seriously. I mean, that's obvious. That's the obvious bit, but this is some shit that needs to be discussed. Alright, first of all, let's check this bit out. Well, there's uh, I'm just going to give you guys the idea where what she is talking about stems from. All right. So yeah, let's play this.
Patriarchy is not sexy, like quite literally. For 25,000 years, the human race worshipped the goddess and women were in power, which with that matriarchy meant.
Here's the claim. All right. It's Marija Gimbutas. The problem with her is she dug out a few uh, gods, statues from the old European eras, and she was like, "Oh, just because there are more statues of female goddesses, it must have been a matriarchal society." Guys, just because there are more statues of Mary than every other saint, just because there are bigger festivities surrounding the worship of goddesses in certain cultures like Hinduism, doesn't mean that these cultures are quote unquote led by women. And that's not possible, because I'll get to that in a moment. But the reason that these societies worshipped goddesses is because they respected the role of the goddess as the role of women in society as mothers and nurturers. They did not think of women as leaders unless it's really necessary to save their family. That's the whole idea that these people completely ignore. It just means that the role of women as mothers and wives was seen in a higher regard than it is today. It doesn't mean that women were leaders. And this whole garbage that she props up,
That women had the power and they would pass their wealth, their property, from mother to daughter. The goddess religion was very sexually open and free. There was no purity.
alright, everything else that she's making up is from the whole projection of Marija Gimbutas' own opinion, which she presented as facts. There is no proof that societies living in ancient Europe were any less violence prone. There's no proof that humans at any point of time were not the most destructive species that the world has ever known. Check this out: the giant humans that hunted and cannibalized the Neanderthals. Well, this is also something that's important, because she will go on to make a claim,
Culture, there was no shaming,
and there is absolutely no proof of what you are claiming.
and that totally worked because women were free and did things that felt good, as did men, and you always know who someone's mom comes from because human beings 100% of the time are born from women. Who's the dad? Who cares? It's a non-issue when you live in a matriarchy.
Except the problem is the true matriarchy has never existed. For a species to have one sex dominate the other, that sex requires to be significantly that sex requires to significantly supersede the opposite sex in one or multiple attributes. For example, orcas are not really matriarchal. It's just that the old surviving grandma, might lead the pack to areas that they do not know because they are younger, and because the old male orca has died because they don't live as long. Then the uh, quote unquote matriarch orca has to lead the other orcas to those areas where they can hunt seals, sea lions, whatever So it's not that they are not considered worthy of friendship. It's like the old grandma that people ask pennies from whenever they are extremely like fucked up somewhere. It's not like they want to be friends with that grandma. In fact, orcas form relationships strictly in their own age group, and sometimes within their own gender, much like humans do. And the males are stronger, and the males take a lead in the hunts. All of this is just clear data. It's just that those male orcas might return to their packs because when they are starving, because the quote unquote matriarch might lead them. So it's not a true matriarchy. Bonobos are a true matriarchy because the females are significantly more intelligent, significantly more cohesive, and significantly more likely to organize. So these are the things that give bonobos the advantage. Yeah, they are physically weaker, but everything else, every single other thing is in the favor of the female bonobo. With hyenas, it's not even that. The female hyena is larger, the female hyena is stronger as well. But with human beings, human males just supersede human females in pretty much everything: physical strength, intelligence, speed, durability. Maybe it's not flexibility, but flexibility doesn't matter for shit. Flexibility doesn't matter for shit if you don't have the other things to go by with it. What are you gonna do? Flex your finger a little bit back to control society? That's not how it would work. And that claim, it would have been so much more difficult to understand who the father was. Even today, more than human beings, a third of fathers can recognize their own children's smell. Now, like everything else, this has diminished over time because the genetic requirement of this was no longer, there. Just like human jaws, this ability has also shrunk, but it's still present in 33% of human fathers. So they can 100% smell. And what she's talking about, oh, property was passed down through the father's clan. Like, what property, bruh? What property? What was the mother gonna feed the child? Growing children need nutritious food. Growing children need, and look at this. This is the module of hunter-gatherer society. The jobs which are entirely male dominated are all the protein rich foods. Fish, mostly male. Honey, mostly male. Extremely good source of carbohydrates in a world where you don't have grains. Trapped fauna, making traps, that was also mostly done by men. Fowl, mostly men. Large land fauna, mostly men. Large aquatic fauna, exclusively male. Vegetal foods, lowest nutrition, only good for making good shit. And that's important. I'm not telling you that it's not important, but it ain't gonna keep your child alive and functioning. Shellfish, aquatic fauna. So this is Harlow's data, all right. Difficult to catch, and not very nutritious in the long run because many human beings do have allergy to shellfish. So it's not a source of food that's viable to a lot of the population. Insects, too much, covering, too little meat. Small fauna, too difficult to catch, too little return, too much energy spent. Eggs, they can only take you so far. Eggs are nowhere near fulfilling either. So how many eggs are you going to catch anyways, right? The animal is just going to move its settlement away from you and lay the eggs further and further away. And over time, that would mean less and less return on investment. So what property were women acquiring? Shellfish and insects? That's the property that they were going to pass down to their children? Like, dude, their children needed the fish, the honey, the trapped fauna, the fowl, that meat. They needed that meat, their children. And in exchange, and women also needed that meat, and which they clearly could not hunt for themselves. So in exchange for that meat, men would ask for the favor that all the children would be their own. And of course, if the child was not their own, they could just sniff it out. Like, I guess some people still retain this ability, like Joe Biden, but yeah, it's a diminishing it's a diminishing ability, but that should give you a good idea of how humans in the past were able to discern which child was their own and which child wasn't their own.
But if you live in a patriarchy where you're passing the power from father to son, it becomes a way harder thing to track.
It doesn't become a way harder thing to track because the men could just sniff their children, and because and let me explain this on an evolutionary basis. You have a population, one which has monogamous women and another which has you live in a population which has both monogamous and polygamous women, right? The polygamous women wouldn't be given meat by any of the men if those women were not ensuring that, and they could sniff the child's scent, right? So they would just leave the child be, and they would just let the child die if it was not their own child. So those women simply did not reproduce into the next generation, while the women who had the mental genetics to only be strictly monogamous, those were the women that the men stuck with. So what happened next was a vast majority of women who did pass on their genes had the mental genetics to stick to one man. That's what happened because men are competitive and they want to pass on their genes more than the next man.
How do you know who the father is? You treat women like property. You keep them shamed and locked up and control their bodies so that they only have access to one man.
And that is absolutely also not true. Roy Baumeister discovered that the repression of female sexuality has got to do a lot with securing marketplace advantage. Women could not do shit on their own, and they required men in that world to do stuff for them. In exchange for that, they made sex rare. They ensured that only one man would stick with them and not get the sex for free, not have children with them for free, and they would keep alive as well to make their own life comfortable as well. Because, like you can see, women were clearly not hunting the good stuff. They were not hunting the tasty meat. They were not getting the nutritious honey. It clearly just wasn't happening. If women were left on their own, they simply would be malnourished. Their children, which with what kind of polygamy I don't know, they would also starve to death. So it was a better option to pass on your genes. And those women who are monogamous, those were the women that survived. Evolution has chosen monogamy because for a huge portion of human history, women weren't able to do shit. And I'm not telling you men did not allow them to do shit, they couldn't do shit. And yeah, also account for the fact that men could easily smell which child was their own, and then they could just leave the child. Back then, murder wasn't even something that was considered wrong if it was a bastard child.
And that's how you track, oh, this is that man's son. So when Bro Clan wanted to promote worshipping,
She is claiming that the Aryans wanted women to worship a man. Like, bro, that's not true. The Aryans have plenty of female goddesses, like female gods, like goddesses. You have Frigga, you have all of these Aphrodite, you have these what do you call it, Durga, all of these. But there is no proof that in any single culture, even in the Chinese, the female goddesses are worshipped as owners of property. They're not worshipped as leaders of society. They're worshipped as mother, wife, and sister. That's what they're worshipped as. Worshipping a man, dude, there's no religion that worships women as a source of power. At best, because women are seen as pure. That's the reason that the Greeks believed in lady justice. The goddess of justice was female because they believed that women were pure.
a man god, and for power to be with men, it was a huge issue to overcome because
Brother, you have no power. You would just fucking die if you were left out in the wild. That's what would happen to you. You have no survival skills to speak of, and you talk about how women back then had all the power. You don't speak for yourself. Speak for yourself. And guys, remember, to believe that these things, they did not have the ability to smell their own children. These things were the most savage of the savages. They were the most brutal of the brutes. And they did not have the ability to smell their own children. That's just garbage. That's just peddled nonsense to portray men as villains at all points in history. Oh, men could not smell which child, men could not know which child was their own, so men imprisoned women because men were insecure. Bro, men could easily smell out which child was their own, and if it wasn't their own, they were not going to provide the honey, they were not going to provide the meat, they were not going to hunt whales, they're not going to hunt mammoths, and they're not going to provide fish. That's what was going to happen, and the child was going to die. And the child was going to die. If it was not their own child, they would fucking leave the child to die. Back then, humans weren't this virtue signaling either. They'd just fucking leave the child to die. Women own power. What power, bro? What power? You hunted nothing. You couldn't even keep yourself alive by hunting this food that was important for your survival. What are you talking about? Your benefit was, and this is still true, that women are better nurturers. There's no denying the fact that women are better nurturers, but it's not that men trapped women. Women were trapped by their own biology. They could not keep themselves alive for most of human history. And they had to rely, they couldn't keep their children alive simply by their nurturing. They needed the resources. Money is a relatively new concept. Jobs are a relatively new concept, and even among those jobs, safe jobs did not exist until like the 20th century. So women simply couldn't work. This is something that you have to think about and embellish in your mind over and over again. It was not some conspiracy to treat women like objects, but rather that women themselves could not survive and do shit about it, and they would have required men. They would have required to limit the supply of sex. They would have required to stop fucking around if they wanted one man to feed them. That's the idea.